Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the DVC Show. Coming up, the folks on the DVC forums on DISboards.com spotted some shady stuff going on with the points charts, and looks like DVC is changing them. We're going to talk all about that. We'll talk all about PointsGate, as we're calling it, coming up next. Welcome, folks. Coming to you from the Bob Varley Studio in Orlando, Florida. I'm your host, Pete Werner, joined in the studio this week by my producer, Mr. Corey Fiescanaro.
Welcome home.
Also joining us remotely, senior editor for DVCFan.com, Mr. Paul Krieger.
Hey, everybody.
And from DISboards.com, Rob Lindsay, a.k.a. Webmaster Doc.
Hello.
And so before we get started, just a reminder, our show is brought to you by the World of DVC. That includes DVCResaleMarket.com if you're interested in buying a DVC resale contract, DVCRentalStore.com if you're interested in renting out your points or renting points for yourself, and MoneraFinancial.com, which will help you finance very easily, very quickly, help you finance your next DVC resale purchase. Links to all of those websites down below in the show notes. All right, Paul, I am going to start with you because you have been following this cluster and can explain to everybody better than I can what exactly is going on.
So first and foremost, I just want to say that the people on DISboards.com are amazing. There's a crazy group of people over there that dive into point charts, dive into the analytics of everything Disney Vacation Club. And they're really the ones to credit with this. And it's not the first time we've experienced it. And that's where I sort of want to start the discussion, is that twice in the past 3 years, we've seen Disney Vacation Club revise or revert back the planned point chart changes that they've announced. This would be that second time. We are getting, and again, I'm going to sort of chalk it up as a rumor right now, but it seems fairly likely to happen that Disney Vacation Club is going to modify the 2022 point charts that were originally published in December of 2020. And when I first started reading through the thread, and we'll put a link to that in the description down below, I said you need to be a PhD or a doctor to understand this. So I called the best doctor that I know, Webmaster Doc. And I sort of got him to review this a little bit, and also to give me some historic background as to how the point charts work. And I'll have him chime in a minute. The first two things that I think are very important to understand when it comes to point charts. So we know what point charts are. They essentially dictate how many points per night it will cost us to stay at a Disney Vacation Club property. Those point charts are created based off of what is essentially a base year that is established when Disney Vacation Club creates a new property. So they create a base year in which they decide that the resort has this many points, it costs this much to stay at each resort or each villa, and it divides things into a certain set of categories and times of year in which you can stay. That base year is then used each year, or at least we believe it's used each year, to make subtle adjustments to the point charts. The largest takeaway that you should understand is that there should not be a huge fluctuation year to year. Essentially, the way I view it and the way that many people view the guidelines set up forth by Disney Vacation is that they are not allowed to change things without or add points to one section without removing them to another. It must essentially stay fairly equal. There is a small fluctuation that will occur related to holidays and weekends and when all of that stuff falls, because each year is a little bit different. But in a nutshell, it should stay relatively the same. We saw this change for the first time in 2020, in which there was a large change related to the point chart. Now, anyone that's followed us or that's followed Disney Vacation Club for a long time knows that those 2020 changes were actually reverted back. They got rid of them, and that was a result also of a thread that occurred on DISboard. So we're heading down a similar path here in 2022. A little bit of a different issue. The issue at hand here is that last year we moved from a 5-season system or a 5-season tier in terms of when you can stay and how much it costs you to stay to a 7-season tier. Not many people balked at that. You know, it really, some people like myself, it was positive that it occurred because it actually made the certain times of year that I vacation cheaper. For other people, it made it a little bit more expensive. But Disney Vacation Club's justification of that was that they were trying to do it to help balance the point charts, make issues related to availability go away, and make high point seasons or high travel seasons a little bit more expensive. And that all makes sense. People really didn't pitch much of an issue with all of that. In 2022, we're sort of seeing more of the underlying idea that they had with going with that. And it all focuses around when the Easter holiday is and how they can basically artificially inflate the number of points for a resort. So there's a concept in Disney Vacation Club called breakage. Breakage basically means that within 60 days of check-in, Disney Vacation Club has the right to remove rooms from inventory and sell those rooms off as cash. We as members benefit a little bit from breakage. We receive up to 2.5% of income credited towards our dues for that breakage income. The interesting thing is that they've been maxing out breakage for the past few years, but we're only allowed to receive as members up to 2.5%. So in looking at the point charts as a whole, they are creating a lot more points in the system than there should be, and it's causing issues related to people having to spend more points to stay at their Disney Vacation Club properties. And it's also a question of whether or not it's within the best interest of members. Is it really benefiting members? I feel like I've been talking for a long time, so I'm going to refer to Doc a little bit and see what he has to chime in. But I would emphasize that we're touching this on a very surface level because there is a lot to dig into regarding what is going on. And by no way are we claiming that DVC did anything illegal. More so, I think it goes down the path of DVC continues to need to be more transparent in what they are doing.
That is exactly what I want to interject here. First of all, I'm glad you added that disclaimer. I want to be very, very clear. We don't know that anything illegal or anything like that has gone on, and we're not claiming that. What we're saying is it looks sketchy. And it does look sketchy, especially when you consider, and I think Rob will speak to this a little bit as well, not necessarily the first time this has gone on, and certainly not the first time that the amazing folks on our DVC forums on DISboards.com have called them out on some of these changes. I mean, like, I'm sure the folks at DVC, at Disney Vacation Club, just like have pictures of the boards up and they throw darts at them because the boards probably make their life a living hell, but that's what the membership needs, right? It needs people en masse that are going to speak on behalf of the membership, because sometimes some of these changes don't really appear to be positive for the members. And we had this issue last year with the start of COVID, the complete lack of transparency, the complete inability of Disney Vacation Club apparently to form complete sentences. And there's all these questions around things. And now part of this is the Disney culture, right? The Disney culture is not, when it comes to stuff like this, is not transparent. But here we're talking about a purchased real estate interest. There are other factors to this. You're also not asking somebody to spend $3,000 on a hotel room. You're asking them to spend $30,000 on a timeshare. And your obligation for transparency increases with the amount of money you're asking for. So the complete lack of transparency under Terry Schultz's leadership leads me to ask one question. How does this woman still have a job? How does this woman still have a job? They botched the what happened with COVID and how they responded to it, their lack of transparency, their lack of communication with the membership for months. And now this. And now this. You're going to make these massive changes to the points charts. And it's not like you started doing this yesterday. You know it's going to look sketchy. You know there are people on the internet, like the folks on DISboards, that are going to say something. I mean, it's like Groundhog Day with these people. I mean, Rob, do you agree with me, or what's your take on it?
Absolutely, Pete. The very first reallocation like this was announced in 1994 to cover the points charts for Old Key West in 1996. At that time, there was no big internet presence to dissect all this and discuss it, but it was pretty apparent from looking at the point charts and the changes that they did a reasonable job of following the rules that they set up, where at that time the weekends were really high. Friday and Saturday nights was ridiculous, and everything else was really inexpensive. So they raised some of the weeknights and lowered the weekends. It didn't cause a big stink, and most members had the opportunity to assess that and decide it was acceptable behavior. The next reallocations came in the late, around 2010. For 2 or 3 years, we had some minor changes, and the discussion at that time was still centered on lowering weekends, raising the weeknight, and nobody was too upset. It would affect people because some people would benefit from it and find that the time they wanted to go was now lower, and other people were hurt. And the common response then was buy more points. And a lot of people did. But what happened in 2018 and again this December 2020 has really gotten the attention of people, and thank goodness for the people on the DVC forums on the DIS who have taken this on in earnest. Years ago, a wise man told me that we wanted to be careful to not allow the DIS to be used as a platform for angry villagers with pitchforks to storm the castle. And that wise man is involved in this podcast right now. But so we have been reasonably cautioned, but this year it's time to speak up again. This is the second time now in 3 years where they apparently are going to backtrack on a decision made. They had a whole year to make these point charts up. And now to say the report that we're getting now is that they're going to make this happen in the next month or so, where they're going to revert the point charts to make it more reasonable.
Well, let me just throw this in real quick. Yes, I was the one who said we don't want. I know, ironic, right? The angry villagers storming the castle. Well, I'm going to be handing out the pitchforks, but I also do want to say, in fairness, there may be factors involved in this on DVC's side that we're not aware of, and I will absolutely use this opportunity to tell anybody from DVC who's watching that I will give you an open platform with absolutely no questions asked to tell your side of the story here. I would absolutely do that. Do I think I'm ever going to get that phone call? Probably not. But if I did get that phone call, 100%, I would give equal time to have them explain it. And you know what? They need, like I said, I doubt very seriously they'll do that. So you know what? Maybe you need to put some communication together and explain to people what the hell's going on. Because you talk about how important the membership is, and I can't use the expression I would normally use right now if I was not on camera, but no, I can't even allude to it. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? So as far as I'm concerned right now, it's just, why do we have to be the policemen to watch what these people are doing? Why is that our job? Is that enjoyable? Is that relaxing? Is that magical? Is that enchanting? No, it's not. It's not. So maybe you need to be a little more consistent with your marketing. And talk about how much you value members. When you have them screaming like this, to the point where you get called out, let's just be honest. You're not doing this to make the members happy. You got called out. And at this stage of the game, how do you not know how this story is going to end? I don't get it. It really is like Groundhog Day with these people. It really is like Groundhog Day. And I mean, Doc, you've been around since the beginning. You've followed, DVC very, very closely from the beginning. I was thinking about it today. I'm not sure exactly when you started on DISboards.com. I know I've been there since day one, and I don't remember when you weren't. So you've been following this stuff really, for 24 years now. And
DVC has the responsibility, and it's in print in the public offering statements for each resort, where they have the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility, to balance the demand for all the villas at all the resorts. And they do that by either increasing or decreasing the points needed to stay. But any increase, I'm reading from a POS now, any increase or decrease in the home resort vacation point reservation requirement for a given use day must be offset by a corresponding decrease or increase for another use day or days in any other vacation
That's
home.
what I always thought. That's what I always thought, that if they take anything away, or they add points to it, like, oh, you know what, this week in December we have to add 10 points a night, they got to take those points away from another part of the year.
Yep.
And it sounds like they tried to get away with not doing that here. Am I right? Is that kind of what happened?
And the problem that this creates is that I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but breakage is the process in which DVC does have the opportunity to pull rooms out of inventory and sell them for cash. When we get back to that base year concept, there's a set number of points that members have. There's that set number of points for a resort. But the more that they artificially inflate the point charts, there's now a discrepancy between where the number of points that owners have and the number of points that actually are within a resort for a calendar year. And the discrepancy in between these are, let's say, 20 to 30,000 points, in which DVC, in theory, can do multiple things. First off, they can increase the cost that it takes for certain people to stay at a certain resort. And they can also have more breakage in. So it's an opportunity for them to potentially capture more money. And I'm not claiming that's what they're doing here, but by moving to the 7-season system, Easter is the key, because Easter now can fall into 3 different seasons. And the problem in which what we're seeing in the 2022 point charts is that when Easter falls in a season that is historically a low point season, that escalates the points required in that season, because they can do that around the holiday. But it does not decrease the points required in what would be the season that is historically a little bit higher. So now the entire system has an inflated number of points. And so the entire point charts for that year have an inflated number of points, which DVC then can allocate and say, oh, we're going to make it cost you a little bit more to stay in the studio, or do this or do that. And again, the financial gain that they receive does not fully benefit the members. We only get 2.5% of that breakage income. So whose interest do they have in mind here? I will point out that I jumped on the DISboards forum and in this thread, and I asked the members that have been really engaged in this conversation and who have spoken to management and all of that, what they want conveyed here. And one of the big takeaways was that they did want to applaud the people that they have spoken to with management, because they were receptive to talking with them, they were receptive to listening to them, and ultimately these changes are only coming about because enough people actually called in and talked to these people, and DVC is choosing to change these these point charts for 2022. And they're doing that as a result of all these people that called, and they're claiming that it's because they're listening to member feedback, and whether that's true is not for me to debate. But I think it's a result of people actually paying attention to what they own. When I was talking to Doc earlier today, I used the analogy of, you buy a car. Well, you pay attention to your gas gauge, you pay attention to your oil, you pay attention to when you need to get a recall addressed, or that kind of stuff. So us as members, we do have a little bit of a fiduciary responsibility to just have a sense of checks and balances in place, but so that DVC does not try to get away with these certain things.
I agree with you, Paul. I agree that we have a responsibility as owners. Should it really have to extend to this level to force them to honor their agreement? Should it really have to extend to this level to highlight and almost embarrass them into making these changes? I don't think that should be part of the member experience. Are we going to see that on the tour next? That, here's a villa, and you are going to have to, you're going to have to be vigilant, because we're going to do some shady crap, and you're going to have to watch us, because if you don't, we're going to shank you in the back. I mean, that's what it feels like. And I'm very happy that there are people reporting that they're speaking to people in management, and they've been very open and very receptive. I think that's great. But like I said, not the first rodeo we've been to with this, by a long shot. At what point do you factor this into your decision making? Do you not know how the membership is going to react? Or are you doing this with a dartboard and a Ouija board? Is that how you're making your decisions? And hoping we're not going to notice? They're going to notice. They're going to notice. So maybe factor some of that in. Maybe factor some of that in when you make these decisions. I don't want to get too far off on a tear here, but this just burns.
And unfortunately, it puts Disney Vacation Club into that category that we've never put them in. They have stood above all other timeshares in respecting the ownership and respecting its members. And that's one of the key principles behind Disney Vacation Club. And so these type of actions, these type of things that are uncovered does not keep them in that light. It puts them down there with the other timeshares that are trying to get away with some shady crap.
Well, I just wonder, I wonder how many people in the decision-making process come from the travel and resort side. Because Disney will do this. Now, the Diz, our shows and stuff, we've always been pretty good at calling them out. I've never felt like we needed to be police officers. But, the resort side of things, they're used to getting away with certain things because, they raise ticket prices and we scream, but the next week we go. But that's not the case here. This is a whole different dynamic.
Days, when we first joined, it felt like a club where members treated other members as members of a club. And quite honestly, the staff at the hotels and the staff of DVC treated us like we were part of a big organization, big happy family. And over time, that has gone away.
When do you think, Doc, Rob, when do you think that started to change?
Oh boy. I'm going to say it took 10 years. By the time they tried the extension for Old Key West, it was apparent that they were not in it just for the members.
Well, I'm not gonna fault them for wanting to make money. They're a business. I'm not going to fault them for that. I am going to fault them for how they do it.
Yep.
And with the integrity and transparency with which they do it. That is what we're faulting them for here. I don't blame any organization for trying to make money. That's what you're in business to do. They're not running a halfway house. This is not a charity. They're supposed to make money. And all good. But if you've got to do, if you have to do it really without transparency, then you got to ask yourself, how smart are you really? How good are you at this? How good are you at making money versus how good are you at ripping people off? Maybe that's the question.
They could very easily share some of the numbers that they have to explain why they're doing this. One of the components, this is in the public offering statement again, it's called historic occupancy levels. And this is supposed to be a chart that's done after 2 years of a resort opening, showing the levels of occupancy for each reservation season at each resort. And then the chart is supposed to be revised and updated every 2 years. I have a copy of one from 1998 that did exactly that. This covered Old Key West, Vero, Hilton Head, and Boardwalk Villas. And it showed in 95, the adventure season for Old Key West was 100% occupancy. 96 was 100%. 97 was 81%. Anyway, it outlines the last, in this case, 3 years for Old Key West, but the last 2 years for Vero and the current year last year for Hilton Head and Boardwalk that opened in '96. But to my knowledge, we have not been receiving these as a membership. This would be something they could very easily distribute electronically through the website. And I haven't seen.
You know what they could also do? You know what they could also do? Put somebody on camera and explain it. Explain why we made this change.
Yep.
Why we made this decision. We may not agree with you. We may take exception to some of your reasoning, but at least we'd have an idea of what it is. And at least it would help guide the discussion. Instead, I mean, no disrespect to my fellow Disney fans on DISboards, they let the inmates run the asylum. In the absence of information, a vacuum is created.
Yep.
And people will fill in the narrative. They will fill in the narrative themselves.
With the only information they have access to.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Now, I'm always trying to be cautious of that. I'm guilty of doing it myself. In the absence of information, this was one of the things I complained about with Disney Cruise Line recently, that they were not, where Royal Caribbean, every time somebody at Royal Caribbean went to the bathroom, there was a mass email sent out. Anything they did to that ship, we wiped the floor today. Let's send out an email. We knew everything that was happening on those ships, what they were doing to make them safe, what they were doing to address the concerns people were going to have when cruising resumes. Disney Cruise Line, crickets.
Yep.
And there was a rumor going around that the reason that there wasn't, it was not a big rumor, but it'd be totally fantastical and not true at all, but that Disney was going to sell off the cruise line. That's why they decided they were going to lob it off, because it's too much money. They're losing too much money on it. Of course, that is not true in any way, shape, or form. But again, absence of information. People start creating a narrative. Disney hasn't learned this lesson yet. Disney still thinks they can control the internet. They still think they can control the narrative.
Some of the information we do not have. When we purchased, we were told that DVC was going to maintain 2 to 4% of the points to maintain the opportunity to renovate and maintenance on the rooms and so forth. We don't know what that percentage is. We don't know how many points that's involved. We know that those points are not involved in the reservation system directly. They're not counted in that number, but we don't know what that number is. So when they're going to renovate a resort, that shuts down a number of rooms for a long period of time. So that's got to be figured in. So where do those points come from?
And why?
We don't know.
Why wouldn't... look, again, I don't know what the business end of DVC looks like. I really don't. So there may be really legitimate explanations for some of this stuff.
Yep.
There may be really legitimate explanations. Just because something looks a certain way, very rarely is it that way. That's something I've learned over the years. Just because it looks a certain way doesn't always mean it is that way. So there may be really, really good explanations for this. But we're looking at an administration running DVC right now. Like I said, I think it's a successful day for them if they can write in a full sentence. They can't communicate. And you would think, after the ass kicking they got from the membership last year over COVID about not communicating what was going on, that might have been a wake-up call, that we have to get better about this. But here we are. Here we are a year later. Different issue. Same problem. No transparency. Go ahead, Paul.
And I would second your call to anyone from DVC that would love to come on and chat with us and help us understand this better if we're not viewing this correctly. But when I was engaging with some of the people over on DISboards, and there was a little bit of a pushback as to whether or not this was the right time to shed a light on this issue. And my response to that was that, well, if you don't, Disney, as always, is going to try to control this narrative, and it's not going to really put out there what the real issue at hand is. And I think that's what, Pete, you and I, and what we do with DVC Fan and on this show is we want to share the real stories with members, the good, bad, and the ugly, and make sure they understand what they're buying into, and how Disney Vacation Club works. And so I want to keep them educated and convey that information.
That has been the purpose of my websites from the beginning. People were confused. I don't know why one of my dogs is somewhere barking. But from the beginning, I'm an owner of Dreams Unlimited Travel, which sells Disney vacations. And I'm also the host of the Dis Unplugged, where I have been known on occasion to yell at Disney and call them names. And people often wondered, like, how can you sell Disney and then criticize them? I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive. My job is to tell people the truth about what I think, what I see, what I experience, and let them make a decision for themselves. And funny thing, the truth sells. The truth sells. I don't have to lie about it. And so I'm very comfortable and very glad that my career has followed that path. And it's no different with this. Yes, do we represent, do we have an advertiser who sells DVC resales? Yeah, we do. We do. It's one of the reasons they're not on this show right now. Because, I have to be able to do this, and we've got to be able to speak our minds clearly, and tell the truth, because while I love DVC, that my first obligation is not to them. Our first obligation with our sites, our shows, everything we do is to our audience, and to tell you the truth as we see it. Sometimes we get it wrong. We're human, we're not perfect. And I fully accept that there may be facts here that we don't have. I'm certain there are facts here that we don't have. And whether they want to send somebody to come talk to us on a show, or they want to, release a statement clarifying some of this stuff, that's just as good. Then that would go a long way. That would go a long way. You want to talk about how much you love the members and how much you're here for the members? Put your money where your damn mouth is. And be transparent. Be transparent with what's going on. Because you've got a lot of members who are paying attention who don't like what they see. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I was just going to say, when this goes up, we will already have an article up over on DVC Fan that probably much better explains what's going on than what I said today, because I feel like I just word vomited for a half hour. So please head over there and read the article, and read the thread on DISboards to make your own opinion. And as Pete said, we at this point fully expect that within the next week or two, we should hear something from Disney Vacation Club, some sort of statement along with these revised point charts for the remainder of 2022. And I say remainder because they're not going to be able to really revise what has already been booked for 2022. So we're really looking at a revision that's probably only going to change the second half of the booking year for 2022, and try to adjust things appropriately.
Because we're already booked through the first quarter of 2022.
Yeah.
Well,
so we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. All right. Yeah, I understand the discussion gets a little wonky, but I think it was an important discussion, and we talked about it this morning and decided that we probably needed to do this show. So there you have it, folks. That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next week with another episode of the DVC Show. Have a great week.